Howdy, friends. I'm Galen, and welcome to the Gaming Adventure and Discovery Explorers.
A show about our adventures and discoveries as we explore the world of gaming. I'm Chad.
On today's show,
Wizards in Myth and Literature. Let's explore.
Chad, how you doing?
Hey, Galen, I am great.
Awesome.
This was my favorite kind of week.
Oh, perfect. I was so excited when we were talking about the idea for this podcast, what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Wizards. I was like,
Wizards.
I almost went out and got myself a big pointy hat because I was like, I'm ready to do it.
Oh, man. Yeah. You know, a good friend of mine, Ryan, who you gamed with, who was in our last campaign, he's in a camp, a Burning Man camp that's called FU, I'm a Wizard, is what the camp is called.
Nice.
And so he's got like a wizard's hat, and they all do, his whole camp of people.
That's awesome.
When they go to Burning Man or the regional burning events or whatever, it's super fun and super awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah, so he's already done it.
Yeah. So before we jump into that, though,
yes,
we have to talk about some Mornheim stuff.
Yeah, we do. We played last Saturday.
We did. Oh, I have to tell you, too, a little side note, I was so raring to go to play D&D. For some reason, it felt like I hadn't played D&D for 100 years.
It felt long. And I have to admit, like, even for me, like, it's not that I wasn't motivated, but it felt... I had trouble kind of getting the prep going. Like, I had to, it felt more distant in my own head too, to like get the prep back online and synced up. Like sometimes I just have it in my head all the time, but this time I had to look at my notes a little bit more and kind of sort it out and kind of recover from the 3.5 weeks of not playing D&D.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so I was ready to go, and the session did not disappoint at all. So
good.
All right, so here's a little recap, everybody. The life in Mornheim. So we had gotten into this temple, and it was a repurposed temple of the Raven Queen that was being taken over by advocates of Loviatar, an evil deity. And so we were on the hunt for these magic items for one of the party. And we headed down into the basement of this crypt. Not crypt. It felt like a crypt afterwards. We went down to the basement of this temple, and we encountered, there were 3 zombies down there. And the party's like, okay, 3 zombies, that's not a problem. And they weren't a problem. We took care of them pretty easily. And so the rest of the party went down into this room underneath the main floor of the temple. And we saw on one side of the room, there was a door that had a curtain in front of it. And on either side of the door were 2 statues dedicated to the Raven Queen. And in the center, surrounded by this sort of globe of glowing force, was a sword. And the glowing force orb covered the door, so we couldn't get past the door that way. And on the other side of the room, opposite to that sword, there was another sword in another glowing orb with another door behind it. And then there were 2 doors on the other sides of the room as well. And so the character that was on the quest for this magic item...
Tenley, yeah.
Yeah, Tenley did a sort of meditation of sorts to try and connect with this sword, which I think is sentient in some way, this little magic item. And he ended up being able to get the sword through that force field, and when he did, the force fields disappeared on both sides of the room. And so it's great. Now the character has a magic weapon, but not great in that through both sets of doors flooded this seemingly unending horde of zombies and skeleton archers, which were a real pain in the patootie. And so we initially started fighting, and then when they started to flank us, we realized that we were pretty severely outnumbered. And as we started getting dinged up and our healing stopped, we just ran out of resources, right? And so we had to leave. One of our rogues picked the lock on one of the doors to the side, and we did a sort of military retreat through that doorway. My character, Mend, ended up going down.
Oh, yeah.
But thankfully, through a administered healing potion by another member of the party, I got back up. But the friend or sort of contact of one of our player characters, of Tenley, the one who was on this mission, she didn't fare so well. She was killed by the zombies. We were able to get her body out, but she was killed in the retrieval of these magic items. So we fought our way out of the temple. We locked the door, which was good because the skeletons and zombies were being led by some white or something horrible in there. And so we tucked tail and beat feet out of there. We got out of the temple. We were able to find some transportation. We took a wagon to the Temple of Ilmater, which is the god that my character, Cleric, is devoted to. And we were able to get some sort of information about, a little bit more information about the temple, really. But it was a safe spot for the night. So we were able to stay there for the night and then go back to our headquarters at one of the towers at Tower Inverness is where we were staying. And then we got to do fun downtime stuff, which was really cool because every character got to do, there were really characterful interactions and revealing of character. So everybody got to do whatever they wanted to do. So my character did some religious service and ended up earning a boon from the Temple of Ilmater. And another character went on what they call it, it's like doing crimes or criminal activity.
Just crime. I think
it's just crime. Just crime. Yeah, it was pretty great. It was just really cool. So, and then we all, no, not all, I didn't, but soon, leveled up to 3rd level for most of the party now, which is fun because that's when a lot of the stuff mechanically in the game starts to really kick in for the characters and stuff. So, yeah, it was a really eventful session. It was the first time that the party had to deal with a death of an ally, which is a big deal. And just seeing the way that the other members of the party reacted to that and how they treated it was really interesting.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just give a few DM reflections. Thank you for doing the recap.
Yeah, you betcha.
I intentionally wanted to really go for it as far as the combat difficulty in this session. I've reflected before that at higher levels, I've just gotten into the habit as a DM to just really hit hard. Don't let up, just have smart enemies. But at low levels, you really got to be careful because 2nd level, which is where everyone was for most of the session, is really easy to kill player characters and characters in general. And, I didn't want a TPK. That's not the point. But I also wanted a real risk. And I wanted it to feel dangerous. And I also wanted to try out the lingering injuries table that I had been talking about from the Dungeon Master's Guide. So what I had warned people about was that if you go unconscious, we're going to roll on that table. And so that's what we did when Galen's character Mend went down below 0 hit points. And so he had a leg injury, which slowed him down and could have really, if it happened a little differently, could have really been a super big problem. But as it was, they had already withdrawn into a fairly safe area as they were, trying to get away from the zombies and skeletons. And it's recoverable through magic healing. And as a cleric, you have pretty relatively easy access to magical healing. So that was kind of a thoughtful, that's where I was headed with that. I didn't know who I wanted to put down.
It worked out really well. Earlier on, we'd talked about the contact that my character had in the Temple of Ilmater had said that I needed to learn about suffering, which is kind of like what Ilmater's all about. And so character-wise, it worked out really well. And so it was fun. And I just as a player, just brightened up when that happened. Because I love when those sort of magical occurrences happen like that in a game. Where it's just all right, I'm going to take this thing and turn it into something I can build my character around. So it was really nice. Yeah,
and then I think my only other kind of supplemental thing to say this time, I could talk about everything for another 2 hours, but just to move on, after a bit, is the downtime was a new experiment for me. I had run adventures really out of the big books that had been published, and those the ones that we'd used, Out of the Abyss and Hoard of the Dragon Queen, really are very fast adventures. You're trying to save the world, and you're just going from one thing to the next. And so I intentionally was slowing it down. So I had both the Xanathar's Guide to Everything and the Dungeon Master's Guide. downtime rules kind of at hand and ready to go, and did some prompting on y'all's side, but some of you had some ideas that didn't easily fit into that, which was totally fine. But we'll have to do a little work offline to kind of tighten up a few of the things that some of the characters wanted to do. I think Tenley, for example, wants to like open a carpentry shop or something.
Yeah.
And I think that sounds really interesting. And at the beginning of the next session, I will narrate another level of kind of story to that downtime, and then we'll kind of launch from there. Because, we've talked about this before, that I do a little bit better with some time to think when I'm kind of fleshing things out. And so, I'll take all those results that we rolled and narrated, at the end of last session, and I will use that as a, like, while you were doing this, I might, like, for example, give your character a little bit more information about what you did to earn a boon, and maybe some of your interactions at the temple while you were doing that service. For example, I want to introduce another non-player character for you, so it's not just, or for your character to interact with, so that it's not just the head of the order who you would talk to.
Cool.
And I have some other ideas like that. So awesome. That's how I plan to integrate that. So it's a learning curve for me, and it's fun.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think all the players are too. So
yeah, I think so.
Awesome. So let's talk about wizards, a class that we don't have in our game right now in our party. But when you brought this up, like I said, I was really excited about it. And our first foray is going to be the wizards in literature and myth. So take it away, Chad.
Yeah, and so this is a gaming podcast. So part of what inspired me was just thinking about wizards as a character class in Dungeons & Dragons. And we're not going to talk a whole lot about that, but I thought it would be fun to at least start with a quick summary of where that came from, and historically in the history of the game, where wizards were. So it started as just magic users. So I remember in the first box set that I got, 1983, the Frank Metzer box set, there were no wizards. It was just magic user. And that was the same case in first edition. So it was all just magic users. And in first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, there was also an illusionist. But the word wizard was kind of in there, but it really wasn't, it wasn't canon. Now, I think we all thought of them as wizards, or at least, I don't know, my 10-year-old self certainly did. It wasn't until second edition. They were called mages in second edition, but one of the supplement books that came out was called The Complete Wizard's Handbook. And second edition came out with a whole legion of handbooks about specialized kind of character options, including that one. And then in third edition and beyond, wizard became a character class that was called a wizard. I didn't dig into the research about sorcerers and warlocks, but over time, either in second and definitely in third and fourth and fifth edition, sorcerers and warlocks emerged as separate character classes.
Yes, right.
Not the same thing. And so just to kind of call out that's a little bit of a D&D artifice, the difference between a sorcerer, a warlock, and a mage and a wizard.
Right.
Really, and in other future episodes, those words have there's some nuance difference, but mostly they're the same thing or kind of mixed and muddled in kind of English language.
Definitely. Yeah.
At least in my own thinking, it's become so ingrained that wizard is someone with a spell book, and they do study, and their magic comes through effort and learning. That, I realized as I was looking back that's not actually, that doesn't have any real meaning. That's not really how it is. If you look at all, if we step back, which is what we're going to do for the rest of this episode, and just think about, well, what is a wizard? Like, who are other wizards that are interesting and cool? How will that change our thinking? How will that kind of give us permission to approach our gaming differently if we'd like to? So that's how we got here. Actually, before I shift to that, I think you are the only one of the two of us that has ever played a wizard.
Yeah.
Was it just in 4th edition? I know your very first D&D character was a wizard, wasn't
it? Yes, he was. And I think have I played in 5th? No, I have not played a wizard in 5th.
So what was it like? Why did you choose that? Why did you choose wizard?
I chose it because it was one of the main characters in the Penny Arcade podcast.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But I remember when they chose their characters, they were given pre-gens by Chris Perkins.
Okay.
For that. And they went with, like, the iconic D&D classes.
Yep.
They did Cleric, Wizard, and Fighter were their first three. I thought, the Wizard sounds fun. Let me try that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be the Swiss Army knife of magic.
Oh,
that
okay.
was in my mind what I had built up the wizard to be.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And what's interesting is that most of the wizards I'm about to talk about, or we will talk about, are not that way.
Right.
Which is really... And so the first one, I don't know that this is the first appearance, but the first one we're going to talk about goes back to the 8th century BCE. And so the first one is Circe. So I know we just talked Game of Thrones, and this is not Circe from Game of Thrones.
This is a whole different one. Yeah.
Though I think George R. R. Martin probably was very thoughtful about naming her, but...
Yeah.
And I think there's probably some unpacking there, but that's outside of our scope today. So Circe, spelled Circe, appeared in the Odyssey. And so, are you familiar with the Odyssey? Did you ever read that book?
I did, long time ago in college. Yeah.
Yeah. And me too. And I read the Iliad too. And I don't know about you, but I found the Odyssey much more approachable.
Yes.
And readable.
I agree. Yeah.
I did a sampling of those mythological myth books, and I think that was probably the most interesting and easy to read of those. So anyway, I'd recommend it to those with any interest. But anyway, Circe was an enchantress who was living by herself on a otherwise deserted island. And so Odysseus and his crew arrive. They're trying to find their way home. It's the Odyssey. It's the middle of the Odyssey. And she had this lovely singing that they heard, and they saw her working on some enormous loom. So they went in to go kind of talk to her, and she lured them in, and she gave them food that was very familiar, and cheese and wine and all the kind of good stuff. So she welcomed them in. The crew got a little bit drunk, I think. And then she turned them all into swine.
Yep.
And that was pretty much her trick, I think, in that story, was to turn them into swine. And one of them was suspicious and was proven right. So the suspicious one, went back, and they found Odysseus, who I don't think went with his landing party. Yeah. And Odysseus, this isn't, we're not here to talk about him today, but anyway, he was able to work with, I think Hermes helped him. Another kind of interesting, strange thing was that he went back, saved his crew, but then by the end of it, they wound up staying with her for a year.
Right. Yeah.
Feasting and drinking wine. And then at the end, according to Homer, that Circe became something of an advisor for Odysseus and gave them some directions on how to get home, and gave some other directions about how to, get to the underworld. I don't know what that was about. There was some analysis of Circe, and one thing that she was also known as, in addition to being able to transform her enemies into pigs, was that she had this great staying power. I mean, she survived this story, and there's other stories of her kind of floating around. Just want to start out, that's the earliest, where she's this kind of figure who was probably descended from godhood, I think is the way the story goes. Right. But a lot of mystery.
And I think, too, we have a lot of baggage in our heads about what a wizard is.
Yes.
And I think the fact that it's also a woman is really interesting and something to keep in mind as we talk about the rest of our wizards.
Yeah, I think, let's keep returning to that topic, because I think it appears in a few other ways, as we go on. We decided to go chronologically, and I think the most archetypical wizard, the first wizard I ever, I think, knew of, learned about, or ever heard about, was Merlin.
Yes. Yeah, same here.
Yeah, and I had all these kind of ideas about who Merlin was and what Merlin could do, and and it's a story, a name that I came across as a little kid, and had all these imaginative fantasies about what Merlin could do. But then when you really look at the stories, Merlin doesn't do all that much, especially compared to a Dungeons and Dragons wizard.
Yes. Yeah.
He doesn't really cast many spells. Yeah, there's a kind of long history. The way that most of the stories go, and these stories were also very old and kind of emerged and kind of coalesced into the Arthurian myth. But those stories of Merlin even go older, I think older than that.
Yeah.
Born of a mortal woman, but sired by an incubus. So his father was a demon of some kind. And that's where he got his power from.
Right.
And apparently he used some of his magic to engineer the birth of Arthur. And then it was later authors kind of attached Merlin as the king's advisor and the mentor. And there's some kind of, I guess, discrepancy here, but he was either imprisoned or killed by the Lady of the Lake.
Right. I have my first exposure to Merlin was from the 1981 film Excalibur by John Boorman.
Oh, yeah.
Which is kind of an iconic sword and sorcery film.
In an era where there was not much fantasy movies.
Yeah,
there were not many fantasy movies. They were few and far between.
Mm-hmm. And getting a sense of Merlin as a behind-the-scenes, more political figure almost.
Yeah.
Like manipulating bloodlines and that kind of thing to try and get... It almost sounded like, later, it almost sounded to me like Dune with the Bene Gesserits trying to get the Kwisatz Haderach and all that.
Right.
Again, a very different type of wizard than what I think the majority of us would think of as a wizard.
Yeah. Not somebody who's like they're throwing fireballs or throwing magic around at all, really.
It seems like all of his magic is more influence and changing your perception than creating these big pyrotechnic displays and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. That reminds me of the next wizard on our list, who was all, I have this way of thinking about these as I was growing up, it was all Merlin, and then all these other wizards were just not Merlin. It was like Merlin, only it's not Merlin because it's a different story. But my first and kind of most primary not Merlin wizard was then Gandalf. Who I think was probably the second wizard that I came to know as a child, a child of the 80s. So when you really dig in, on the one hand, when you think about just the narrative, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, Gandalf doesn't actually seem that powerful, really. He rides his horse and he casts a light spell and he breaks a rock, a couple rocks.
Yep.
But so what, right?
Yeah.
When you start peeling away deeper into that, and I think these are all from either the Lost Tales or the Silmarillion and just the kind of supplemental materials that J.R. Tolkien wrote. It turns out that the wizards of the Middle-earth are called Istari.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about the Istari, we mean Gandalf and Saruman, who is also very a primary character in those, and also Radagast, of course, who appears in at least The Hobbit, and does appear, I think, or is at least referenced in the Lord of the Rings, the books, I think so, and then there are two other wizards who are never really talked about otherwise, called the Blue Wizards. So it's a very finite number. When we're saying the wizards of Middle-earth, there are literally
a handful.
5. There are 5. There are 5.
Right.
Yeah, in this whole world and all of this time and space of Middle-earth. And so, as one might guess, the Istari are essentially angels or demigods. So these are beings of, who are not of the world, and they were sent by the gods themselves. To counter this overwhelming malicious power that was kind of rising. And I won't get into all the details of that. There's a whole lot of stuff, and the J.R. Tolkien scholars will know a lot more about this.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's a whole big thing. As you might imagine, because they're otherworldly, demigods, they had to control their power. They couldn't just kind of express all of their energy, or else there would be these apocalyptic kind of consequences to that. Right. And all of them came in order to protect the world, to protect Middle-earth. And so they were restricted and had to really work primarily through intermediaries. And that's why they took their human forms.
Yeah.
Merlin was primarily an advisor and a wise figure. And that's really the same for Gandalf.
Yeah.
When he started, he was considered to have the least of magic ability, and wisdom was his main strength. And apparently he didn't want to come to Middle-earth in the first place because he couldn't quite understand what he would accomplish. But clearly he did a lot. And so he wound up with one of the rings of power, and there's a whole kind of unpacking there. But just a quick summary of the rings in Lord of the Rings. There were 3 of them that were created by elves and were never touched by Sauron. And those were owned by Elrond, Gandalf, and Galadriel. Yeah. And they didn't talk about that a whole lot in the movies, but I think there were some visual clues about that.
I think so, yeah.
Anyway, so then we had Saruman, who was, their head of their order and was the most powerful. And, as things go in Middle-earth, the most powerful, he made him the most corruptible.
Yes, indeed.
And led to his downfall, yeah. And then Radagast was really focused with kind of protecting the earth and protecting the world more directly, which is why he didn't appear in the political levels of things.
Right.
the blue wizards just essentially just disappeared. So they never, such a funny thing with Tolkien where he would create these two characters and include them explicitly and then write them out of his histories without really any explicit explanation for what they went to do. So, some ponder that they were focused on protecting, the sea, the water, the ocean, but they never reappeared in Tolkien's stories. So, and there's a whole lot of discussion around Saruman was much more like the kind of wizard we might have imagined. He was probably the most like a Dungeons & Dragons wizard, really.
Right.
Where he had his gaining of power and he thought he could fix things. And it's postulated that he sought to defeat Sauron even when he was allying with him, but just thought that that would be the best way, would be to ally with Sauron, maybe destroy a few million people in the process, and over in a few thousand years be able to.
He took the long view.
Yeah, exactly. Seemed like a doomed enterprise in the first place. So.
Yeah, I have to say, one of the things I've always found interesting about Gandalf is the way that he was introduced in the books. The sense that he was someone of great power was all the way that people reacted to him.
Oh, that's a really good point.
It wasn't that he was necessarily doing really big and important things outright. Is that no, the dwarves know that he has this long history.
Yes.
And the elves know he has this long history. And it's like the character that we're all like, okay, he's the guy. He's the one that we're going to look for and look to. And it's a fun way to set up a character, is just by the reactions of the other characters surrounding them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And we touched on this last week too, where like having a character who has experience, but just has either been injured or is somehow divorced from their previous power that's a really interesting start. That could really,
definitely.
And when you really think about it, if you just took Gandalf's beginning, in the beginning of The Hobbit, like. That's like first level stuff.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, give or take some of his sword work and, whatever, but like he doesn't, really do that much.
Yeah. It's just some really good knowledge checks and so, yeah.
And probably a high charisma. I think that's kind of where you're pointing.
Right.
There is some kind of, I think, some evidence in the literature about, his ability to convince people, to persuade people is probably, part of his explicit powers.
Oh yeah.
Or maybe to bolster them. Maybe bolstering is a better thing. Like you don't really think it's not like Jedi mind trick stuff. He's not really.
No, yeah. He builds people up from within, kind of.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
Because even Bilbo never. Well, at least I don't remember him ever regretting his adventures.
No. Yeah.
And Frodo definitely didn't.
Yep.
But they definitely, neither of them would have without Gandalf there to kind of prod them along.
Exactly.
Now we're digging probably deeper than either of us really have a good working memory of, but when Isildur had the ring and decided to keep it, the One Ring, as I remember it, Gandalf wasn't present there. I don't know what Gandalf was up to at that time.
I don't think he was present there. No.
Yeah, so that's an interesting, he wasn't there to kind of bolster Isildur into doing his best. So, now, he wasn't there when Frodo gave it up either, but Frodo, as a hobbit, maybe had a little bit more focus and control and power. Or not power, I guess. So.
Exactly.
And then from there, we've got the next wizard that I came across. These chronologies are also working out really well, just based on my own experience with wizards. With The Wizard of Earthsea is the book. It was written by Ursula K. Le Guin. And there's a whole series of Earthsea books. And most of them focus on Jed, also known as Sparrowhawk. This isn't a book review episode either, but I do recommend taking a look at that book also. It's a little, you can tell I think it's one of her first books, and she's making some concessions to her publisher. It's a very male dominated world. And it's a little, a lot of the kind of wizard tropes are there in a little obvious way, but if you slow down a little bit, it's really beautiful writing.
Yeah.
You see that, for one thing, it's structured very similarly to what we're used to, where, he's a wizard and magic. He has got an inherent spark for magic. It starts as him as a young man. And he's taught by a mentor and has some challenges there. But like right away, you see that there's a consequence. I think he gets ambitious and impatient. He kind of falters in a way that like Gandalf wouldn't have, for example. He gets a little aggressive, and he unleashes essentially a shadow demon. He kind of lets it free, and it's his mentor is able to help him and to kind of keep him safe, at least temporarily. But that consequence then follows him. The rest of the book is a consequence of that. So then he goes to a magic school and he learns and has some other kind of problems with his magic where he gets ambitious. And then finally he spends a lot of time fleeing the problems that he made. And he turns into I think it might even be a sparrowhawk, actually. I think it is. I think he turns into a hawk to fly away, to go back to his mentor. But he gets trapped in that form because he was in it too long. Magic has a consequence. There's a natural balance, and if you disrupt the balance with magic in a way that disrupts things too much, there's a definite consequence. For example, in this world, this magic system, you can't really just create food. Like, you can create the illusion of food, but you have to kind of take something from somewhere else to make it appear. And you can transform things. You can do that, but you can't just. But even that takes energy and power and whatever. So. The books are actually pretty small and relatively easy to read, but the magic and the feel of it is just slower. And super interesting. So even though it's very similar to kind of some of the stuff we're going to talk about later, it's also very, very different in all the kind of other ways in between.
So I think that leads us into a topic that I wanted to talk about: the Wizards of Discworld by Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, cool.
And it's so interesting as we've been talking about these other wizards, the themes and ideas that I recognize in the writings of Sir Terry Pratchett as he comes up with his wizards. The wizards in Discworld, which is this self-contained world, it's a flat disc, are concentrated in a university. They're only taught in these three main cities, like capital cities on the disc. They're taught magic there, but it's the conceit in this world that the older wizards don't really know how magic works. They know how to use it. The biggest lesson that they've learned is that it's not a good idea to use magic. And kind of like you were talking about with the Wizards of Earthsea, that everything has a cost. In this world, that's like... It's a huge thing. It's
nice.
For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Oh, very similar. Yep.
So in one of the stories, a wizard wants to get to the top of this really tall tower. So he has a boulder dropped off the top of the tower. So he goes up and uses it as some sort of a magical elevator and stuff like that.
Okay. All right.
But the wizards are basically not using magic. They never use magic, the wizards in Discworld, which is really interesting to call them wizards.
Yes.
Because they don't actually do any of it.
Oh, funny.
They study it and they learn about it. And in the Discworld, magic has more to do with like quantum physics in our reality than it does with like the sorcery and like in the D&D kind of thinking and universe. The wizards do have levels in the Discworld.
Oh, really?
The normal human beings are level 0.
Okay, sure.
And then the wizards as they come in are level 1, and you can go up to level 8.
Okay. Huh.
The main university in Discworld is Unseen University, UU. The head of the university is the top level wizard, and he is referred to as the first among equals, because you can get to level 8, but you're not the Arch-Chancellor yet.
Okay.
There's only one Arch-Chancellor. The entirety of the wizarding world is essentially all about political power and the ins and outs of political intrigue inside the university itself.
Okay.
How you can rise to the top. They don't shy away from murder, things like that, to try and, maybe accidentally put a spell maybe on someone's door so they accidentally use magic and blow themselves into a different dimension.
What advantage do they have for being at a high level,
at the top level?
The chancellor or whatever? Why do they care?
It's usually the best spot at dinner. they get all the best food, and they get to call themselves the Arch-Chancellor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's not, when you're in that world, it's the most important thing. But when you look at it from outside, you're like, oh, okay, maybe it's not the most important thing in the world.
Oh, interesting.
In this world too, the magic infuses everything.
Okay.
If you use magic too much, it gets stuck in the world around you and can have unforeseen consequences. So you may cast a spell, and then later you go to your closet and it turns into a giant alligator and eats you. And the wizards have no idea what those consequences will be.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
So it really tears at the fabric of reality, really informed the wizards that the best magic is the magic that you don't use.
Got it. Yeah. So in the Earthsea books, which had a school also and very hierarchical, kind of like the Discworld wizards, there were no women allowed for most of the series.
Yes.
And then later on, Ursula K. Le Guin kind of addressed that. Well, I think once she had gotten enough power as a writer that she could shake that loose, she went back and really kind of played with that trope and unpacked it.
Yeah.
Did what's that situation there in the Discworld universities?
There are no female wizards.
Okay.
Women on Discworld that can do magic are called witches, and they wield a different power. In the sort of mythology of this world, the eighth son of an eighth son of anyone on the planet is automatically a wizard. If a wizard were to have children, his eighth son would be something called a sorcerer.
Okay.
Spelled Sourcerer.
Okay, yep.
Which means that wizard would be a source of magic and would be pretty much unstoppable. So celibacy is a law among wizards. They are not allowed to have children to make sure that they keep the background magic levels down to a tolerable level.
Oh, interesting. Does Terry Pratchett play with that trope very much? Like, does he unpack what that's about, or is it just, or what's the tone of this?
He plays with it in some of the earlier books. And then when he starts to get really in deep about the why and wherefore about it, he kind of lets it go.
Okay. Huh.
His idea is also that the wizards don't exactly know why things are the way they are, and I think he kind of plays with that part of it.
Okay. Yeah. It's so funny how these compare and contrast, right? So wizardry has a balance, and so in Discworld it just leads them to just being nonsense. Leads them to nonsense. They're hurting each other for no good reason.
Yep.
And in the Earthsea world, it's very serious.
Yes. Yeah.
There's funny bits too, but it's very serious also. So I think then that leads us to the last kind of wizard school of this evening.
Let's go to a very different wizard school.
Yeah, which is just bonkers. I think compared to all this measured, wisdom of magic and balance in magic. And then J.K. Rowling came and wrote 7+ and counting 8, 9 and counting books about wizards. And I think Dumbledore is the classic not Merlin type of wizard.
Yeah.
In a world filled with wizards. Gone is their balance. Gone is a requirement of wisdom.
Totally, yeah.
But it's not purely democratic either. I think that's an interesting thing that I think is important to note, is that I think maybe in all of these examples, or at least from Earthsea, and it sounds like it was also the case for Discworld, was that magic has an innate characteristic and a learned component. Not everybody can do it, but it definitely pays to study and practice. I think that's something that has increasingly bugged me about J.K. Rowling's version of it. That the idea of the Muggle and the language around Muggles, though I think maybe, I don't know, I've been wrestling both ways.
Sure.
For one thing, I've heard people in the real world use that as a way of poking fun at people who just don't get it, whatever, don't game, or, whatever, too straight edge or whatever. Yep. But that's just another way to other people.
Yeah, totally. You're totally right.
And even though it's pretty harmless, it has always kind of bugged me when people used it in that context.
Yeah. I agree.
I've actually just been listening to a new podcast I discovered, and I highly recommend. It's the Harry Potter as Sacred Texts, I think is what it's called.
Okay.
It's like, people who've been to divinity school, and I don't know if they're ordained or not, and they literally do an interpretation, chapter by chapter, of, the Harry Potter books as if they were sacred texts.
Oh.
And it's really taken, it's serious, but not super, I mean, they have fun.
Sure.
Also.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, what would that mean if whatever doesn't make sense? You instead of saying it's stupid, you ask like, well, what would that mean? And anyway, they pointed out that I think when Hagrid appears, he's one of the first, if not the first, to use the word muggles. And he does it. He's pretty nasty about it. He's pretty mean about it.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
But that's also a reminder that not every character is perfect. That's a flaw of Hagrid's, maybe more than a J.K. Rowling flaw, to use muggles in that way as an insult, as almost a slur, really, I think.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly.
And, the other interesting thing and the fun thing about the bonkers world of Harry Potter is that the magic is very separated. Like there are schools of magic, or schools isn't quite the right word, but there are categories. There's divination, and there's potion creation, and there's herbalism, and there's attack and defense, and all these different kind of manners and expertises, which is something that I think was a little less emphasized in most of these other things that we've looked at.
Almost like classes in D&D.
It's very much like
different wizard subset.
It's very similar, which is really ironic to me that because I think J.K. Rowling has never showed any interest in gaming and role-playing games or anything like that. Like, she's licensed to a few like big like board game kind of things, but not to a role-playing game, because I think there's just not much money in it. Contrast with Doctor Who or some of these properties, some of these TV properties that have licensed, kind of had some fun games around that. So
yeah.
I wonder if that'll ever change.
So a question, because I'm not familiar with the Earthsea books. The sort of schools that they have there to train their wizards, are women allowed in those?
No, they're not. And early on, it was just a boys' club, and they didn't really explain why. But they did it was essentially a prequel that was set like in the years that the school was forming. And it started as a really both men and women working together to kind of control magic, because there was just too much chaos around it. People were doing magic, but they didn't have control of it, and there was no way to hold people accountable and study it and whatever. So they were just trying to kind of rein it in, and they had a great leader who came, but a little like some of the churches today, where just some of the different factions formed around that political issue. Yeah, and there came a moment that. And I can't remember the details of it, but it was a political reason that faction who really had this kind of puritanical mindset. Those were the words that were used, but I'm pretty sure that was what Ursula K. Le Guin was really talking about. They kind of lost out. That left women with kind of very similar to what you were saying with Discworld. I think they may have read one another. They probably did, actually. Yeah. That left women with kind of as witches who were doing more. The around the house magic and the birthing, helping with the birth process and doing minor cures and, pain relief and fixing broken wings and that sort of thing. Yeah.
In the Discworld, the wizards in Discworld are kind of set apart as like buffoon characters almost. They're sources of humor, and the witches on the Discworld are the only ones that wield any sort of mystic power at all.
Oh.
And they actually help and fix things.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, and people really like to have them around and respect them.
Yeah.
When we move on then to the Harry Potter universe, now men and women are all the same. They're all wizards.
Yes. They're all in the mix. Yep.
They're all dumb and smart and whatever they want to be. Yep. They all make the same mistakes together, which is, I think, one of the really great points about these books. A different twist on the wizard that I think is good to have with our modern sensibilities.
Ursula K. Le Guin, I think she really felt like a need to kind of set it right and explain and kind of reset magic.
Yeah.
From kind of where she was painted into a corner in her some of her earlier books.
I think we reached the end of our topics for today.
I think we did. So hopefully this gives everybody just a different way of thinking about magic using classes, whether you want to call them wizards or whatever in your gaming, and give you some inspiration about how to handle it and fun things to think about.
And we are not done with this topic, with wizards. We have more, don't we?
We do. So in about 2 weeks, we're going to have our second episode about wizards, and we're going to talk about the history of wizards, of the wizard in the real world. So people who have called themselves wizards or been called wizards, and both with what the word has meant and kind of what has really happened there. People like Aleister Crowley and what led to him and what do we know about him.
Yeah.
2 episodes from now, we'll get back to our roots in gaming, and we'll look at different magic systems and the ways that different games approach wizardry.
Yeah. So that's in the future. Until then, Chad, how can folks get a hold of you?
Yeah, I can best be reached at Twitter, on Twitter as, actually I just changed it to the Gaming, Adventure, and Discovery Explorers Twitter feed, but it's at Contclockwise. At CONTCLOCKWISE. And I would also remind folks that if you're watching this on YouTube, on my Continuing Clockwise YouTube channel, if you like this show, please click the like button, and I would encourage you to subscribe if you're interested. And also, while you're at it, if you're so inclined to give us a review on iTunes, that really helps people find us, and 5-star reviews are especially appreciated. Galen, what should folks do to find you?
Well, Chad, I'm glad you asked. You can find me right here on Twitch at Zobme. And funnily enough, you can find me at Zobme on Twitter as well. You can follow me there. I do announcements when I go live on stream. I have some fun miniature painting stuff coming up on stream. Looking forward to that. And we also do the recordings right here for the podcast. So until next time, folks, take care of yourselves.
And game great.
Boom.
Good waves.